Hi, Kim.
Hello,
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good and so excited to connect with you here. Thank you so much for
Oh,
inviting me.
thank you so much for being here today. I was thinking earlier, I think it's been about a year since we
Yeah.
last spoke. Yeah, after my father died. So, yeah, anyone who is watching this, I am so honored and privileged to have Kim Coots here today. Kim is a spiritual healer, an advisor, and evidential medium as well. Um, Kim, you tragically lost your daughter Keira. She was 26 years old and she died suddenly in 2020. And then 3 weeks later, your mother passed as well. And yeah, your story, when I heard it on the Alison Dubois podcast, The Dead Life. And it was shortly after my dad died, and your story was just so it was just one of those. I mean, I've listened to so many things like this, but this really stuck in my mind that I had to reach out to you a year ago. And just speaking to you, I know your work is so important and you're helping so many people that have lost loved ones, and especially children as well, overcome their grief and actually manage to have a relationship with their loved one from across the veil, which I'm so passionate about. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you again.
Oh, thanks. Do you want to just talk about your journey first of all and how you got into this work? Because I know you were into spiritual healing. You were doing lots of work before Keira passed, but do you just want to talk about your life prior to that, and also you're a very successful business leader as well, and talk about your transition from that into mediumship?
Yeah, so thank you. Well, prior to Kira transitioning, I would say I was a closet spiritual healer. I had been in the corporate business world for 25 plus years, and that was really my career. Um, but I had this like urge in me from probably my mid 20s to go into spiritual healing work. And I had a lot of trauma from my childhood and being a mom at such a young age, I really wanted to work through that because I wanted to be a good mom and not bring my emotional and traumatic baggage from my childhood into that.
Yeah.
So I began studying spiritual healing and using it for myself. But through that, all the certifications that I got, I started offering that kind of as a closet business. So I kind of kept it really under the radar because I didn't want it to impact my corporate career.
Yeah. So what, just for anyone that's listening, what were you doing in the corporate world just to see those two polarities?
Yeah. So at that time in the corporate world, I was an executive for a $6 billion global company,
Wow.
working with some of the biggest brands in the world and consulting with them. So it would have probably been pretty alarming for the president of a $6 billion company to know I was a spiritual healer and doing this healing work. So
Yeah.
I was really trying to keep that under the radar, and I did have a period where a corporate client, a big client of mine, discovered my spiritual website and reached out to me about it. And I panicked. And, it was that was my life for quite a while of this is what I really want to do, but I got to keep it under the radar.
I can
And,
relate to that so much. What did you
yeah.
do when they reached out to you?
Well, I did not react well to it with my spiritual business. I was launching a program and I had people purchasing the program, getting it was about to get ready to start. I canceled it, shut my website down. Like I
Um,
closed it.
oh, so it wasn't
And
wasn't in a positive light. It was
no, it
okay.
made me kind of go the other direction. I go, okay, it's getting too big because my business clients are finding out about it.
Yeah. Okay.
So then I actually stopped doing spiritual healing for a couple of years because of that. And I really was not happy, not fulfilled. And um, that led me to starting it again. I'm like, I know this is what I need to do, but I was such at odds with myself because I felt like I had this well established reputation and career in the business world. And, I was a single mom for a lot of my daughter's life. So I felt like I had the responsibility And I also helped take care of my mom. So I was taking care of people at the same time. So it was really a big conflict for me. But inside, I knew that the spiritual healing work was really what I was here to do.
Yeah, your heart work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, the spiritual healing work I did at that time, I was the president of a national talent agency in 2017. And one day I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I need to follow what I'm supposed to be doing. So I gave them notice. I took 4 months off from corporate work altogether, and I became a certified grief coach. I don't know what made me do that, but I just felt this really strong desire to become a grief coach.
And this was prior to Keira
Yeah.
going.
So
Okay.
I completely took 4 months off, went through that program, and at the end of it, I said, I just don't feel like I can become a grief coach and work with people who are grieving because I'm not in their shoes. And this is such an intimate and deep experience. So I didn't do anything with that grief coaching. I just kind of said, I don't know why I felt so drawn to that, but I'm going to put it aside.
So there was no reason, nothing, no prior losses or significant losses. You just had an intuitive urge to study it.
I did, yeah. And I got my certification in it, but I just felt like I know there's other people that do it, and I don't think you have to go through a loss like that to become one. But just for me personally, I felt like I can't relate.
Yeah.
So I just kind of let that go, and I didn't think much about it. I did, though, continue doing my spiritual healing work that I was doing. And, I'm an ordained minister, so I would do as much as I didn't plan on doing, officially officiating funerals. There were times that I was asked to do that, so I did. Um, but I had never felt comfortable about mediumship, which for people who aren't sure what that is, it's communicating with loved ones who have transitioned, are no longer in a physical body. And I can't explain why, but I always felt uncomfortable about it. And it was something I shied away from. I don't know, talking to angels and spirit guides and things seemed very natural to me. But when it came to, and I think for me, I was just so burnt out in the corporate world. I felt like I have enough of people in this life. Why do I want to work with people in the afterlife? Kind
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
feeling with it too.
Ancestral guides, spirit guides, angels, different entities is fine.
Yeah.
More people from the other side too much. Yeah.
Yeah. So anytime that would come across my path, like opportunities to learn it or whatever, I follow Hay House and things like that. Whenever mediumship things would come up, I would automatically say no, like, no, I'm not interested. No, that's not something I feel comfortable with. And then that all changed when my daughter died unexpectedly from a fentanyl overdose. Um, Gosh, I can't even put into words what that was like to just one day that was like any other day. It happened to be a Friday, but it was any typical day, and a phone call that changed my life forever and completely changed the way that I looked at what's called ADC, or after death communication, and mediumship, and all my skepticism around that, and my uncomfortableness about it. I really had to sit with that, and it changed for me tremendously being on the other side of that.
Of course. And I can't even imagine. I don't have children, and I don't even feel worthy of, even having a 1% of anything of what that is like, and how harrowing and how tragic that is for you, and continues to be for you.
Yeah, and it's any loved one that is really loved. It's challenging for anyone. I know your father transitioned, and I know that's not easy either.
Yeah, but I think there's a natural order, and I think losing a child, I think that's something separate altogether. But what I found so interesting is, I think I remember, was it I think it might have been on your side. It might have been when we were talking as well. Maybe last year you said you had a colleague who took their life after her partner died, and that was almost the
I did.
catalyst that you thought, okay, I want to help people know that there is life after death, and you can communicate with your loved ones after death and create a new relationship. Yes, it's never going to be the same as in the physical, but there's still, you can still maintain that relationship, and I found that really inspiring. Do you just want to speak a bit more about that, and also
Yeah.
the timing of that? I mean, how soon after Keira, and also your mother as well. Do you want to speak about that? Because 3 weeks later, tragically, your mum passed.
Yeah, so my daughter died unexpectedly from a fentanyl overdose, and I didn't even know that she was in recovery from drug use. She hid that from me, although I had suspected it, but I wanted to believe her, and she got her life back together. So it was a shock to me from both her passing as well as finding out that she had been struggling with recovery. And then my mom, who was only 64 years old, had just had a back surgery the same week my daughter, just a couple of days before my daughter transitioned. And she got an infection from a back surgery. And the week of my daughter's funeral, I was literally 2 days after my daughter's funeral, I was putting at my mom, I was at the emergency room with my mom, and for 2 weeks was with her making her life and death decisions, and she transitioned from that infection through exactly 3 weeks after my daughter transitioned. And this was all
Too
at the
much.
beginning of COVID as well. So we had
Oh,
all the COVID stuff going on,
yeah.
and
It's just so tragic and too much for any human to even bear. Do you feel in a way that she transitioned from the grief from hearing about Kira's death? It kind of brought on the I'm not saying that it was 100% to do with that. I know she just had back surgery, but do you think it was, they say that people die from broken heart, like you can legitimately die from a
yeah,
broken heart, and she was recovering from back surgery. Do you think that was amplified and exacerbated by the grief?
I do, because I think just the stress of that, the how much stress lowers your immune system. But my daughter and my mom were very close. My daughter actually lived with my mom and helped her because my mom had had a stroke, and they were very close and lived together. So for my mom, it was, I think it just really made it difficult for her body to fight that infection.
Yeah.
And I think that for her, it would have been difficult for her to continue after my daughter passed.
Yeah, I understand. So how long was it after these tragic events that you started to communicate with Keira? Was it a very conscious, active thing that you wanted to explore because you were reluctant? You weren't interested in mediumship before. Obviously, an event like this completely changes you. It changes every aspect of yourself.
Yeah.
Is this something that you consciously wanted to explore, or were you receiving signs and messages from Keira?
Well, I received signs from her right away, like literally the next day after her passing. I had a sign from her. And in my heart, I knew it was her. And I continued, like that first week, I received so many signs from her. In my heart, I knew they were from her, but my mind doubted it
Okay.
because I wondered if I was making it up or if I was desperate. Um,
What
because I,
can I ask what signs they were?
yeah, so her and I have this love of bats. I know most people would be like, bats, really? But we would send each other like baby bat pictures from on Facebook Messenger, and dressed up, as in little baby outfits. And we were advocates for bats because they were becoming endangered. And um, the morning after her passing, I got up really early. I was letting my dogs out, and these two bats flew into my front yard. And they don't come out at dawn, they come out at dusk. So
Yeah.
it was dawn, and there were two bats, and they were flying just above my head in my yard. And I
Well,
just knew that that was her. I
yeah.
mean, they aren't out at that time of the day. they don't come that close to you.
Yeah.
It's not something I would see,
Yeah.
So that just really touched me. The next day I had the same thing happen. Same exact thing. I got up at the same time of the day, went out there, two bats above my head. I didn't see them after that, but I feel like she sent them to me twice to say, yes, it is me.
Yeah.
So that was a sign. I had to put together her photos and pick two songs for her funeral tribute video. And one song I knew for sure, and the second song I just couldn't decide, but I had to turn everything in for it to be ready for her ceremony. So I just got in my Jeep, started driving to the funeral home, and all of the stations that were programmed on my Jeep radio just went static. And I was searching through the radio, like what happened to my radio, and only one song would come in out of the whole radio. And it was the song that reminded me of her, and it's Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses.
Oh,
So I had to pull over because I was just in shock. It was like, oh my gosh,
yeah.
this has to be her because it's the only song that will come in. It
Yeah.
always reminded me of her. And I ended up putting that song in her tribute video because I feel like that's what she was telling me to do.
That's what she was telling you. Yeah. And they can play around with electronics. That's
Yes.
how they can easily manipulate that. So, okay, so you received these signs from her, and then how did the communication start? Whether that was like clairaudient, clairsentient, telepathic, like, can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so kind of how that transpired is I received these signs. At the same time, I was with my mom and trying to help my mom heal. And unfortunately, she transitioned as well. But there were multiple signs for my daughter. And interestingly, a few months before my daughter transitioned, I was completing my professional astrology certification. And my astrology teacher, part of that completion was astrology teacher doing my own chart reading. And she said, Kim, you're a medium. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm not interested in that at all. That's not me. Spiritual healing, yes. Mediumship,
Yeah.
no. And she said, well, I'm going to give you the name of a woman who teaches people mediumship. So if you ever feel the calling for that, because in your chart, you're a medium, I'm going to give you her name. So she had emailed me her name after my reading, and I pulled it up and reached out to her. And I started studying, researching everything about after death communication, what signs were, all of this stuff, and also signed up for mediumship training because with the woman that my astrology teacher had connected me with months before my daughter transitioned. And so that's kind of how it all started flowing into mediumship. But when I started the mediumship program, I did not want to do readings for people. I just wanted to have a connection with my daughter.
Yeah, understandably so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at this point, I wasn't communicating with my daughter. It was more like I was receiving signs from her, and that was the level I was at with it. And as I started doing mediumship training, that's when we had to do practice readings for other people. And I was like, I'm not here to do readings, but it's part of the learning, so I'll do it. And I found I could connect with people from the other side for the living person that I was doing a reading for, doing practice for. And that really solidified things for me because I felt like I was having communication with my daughter in signs.
Yeah.
But then when I was able to also connect with and communicate with other people, and what it really transpired from with my daughter actually having communication beyond the signs was I started doing, I'm a shamanic healing practitioner, so doing spiritual journeys is very common for me. So I started doing journey work to my daughter and communicating with her that way. So between journey work and communicating with her, the signs that she was sending me, and then when I started doing readings for other people as part of my training, all of those things finally made me feel like this is real. Because there's no way that I could be connecting with a loved one on the other side for someone else and giving them information. There's no way I could know if this wasn't real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because for me, having that communication with my daughter and the signs from her, I still wondered if I was making it up, because
Yeah.
how do
Yeah.
you absolutely 100% say this is absolutely it, even though I felt it?
Yeah.
But to have that evidential, proof from doing readings for other people is really what made me go, okay, this is real.
Absolutely. And how did the shamanic healing work, the shamanic journey? Can you talk more, explain a little bit more about that and how that works?
Yeah, well, one of the keys to communicating, whether it's with loved ones on the other side or in spirit in general, is through your intuition. Intuition is the language of the soul, and
Yeah.
it's beyond our five senses. So in shamanic journeying, you're shifting your consciousness to be able to connect with the spirit world. And there's different levels of the spirit world you can connect with for guidance and healing and so forth. So I use that approach to connect with my daughter in the spirit world.
Oh, okay. So you use sorry, have I pronounced it right? Shamanic journey,
Mhm.
the shamanic journey as a vehicle to connect with your daughter, and then you get the evidential mediumship from her, or the mental mediumship from her.
That's how I started out with connecting with her, because
Oh,
I wasn't a trained medium at the time, but I
okay.
used my shamanic journey skills to connect with her.
You connect with her. Okay. So
Yeah.
when you connect with her, is it obviously there's different types of mediumship, it's clairsentient, clairaudient, that telepathic communication to and from. Is there a specific type where you communicate? But how do you create the language with her? What's mainly used?
Yeah, so for her, she shows up for me on my left side, so I can
Yeah,
visually see her
yeah,
on my left side. And this took some training for me as a medium to be able to have my eyes like as a shamanic practitioner, your eyes are closed and you have an eye mask on. But as a evidential medium, through my years of practice, it's my eyes are open, but I can see my daughter on the left, and that's where all of the loved ones that I do readings for come through. Is there's like this the visual aspect on my left here, so I see that clairvoyantly, or the spiritual sight. But
mhm,
I also use pretty much all the other intuitive senses. Not all of them are as strong for me, like smell and taste are not as strong. Hearing is, kind of in the middle for me. Sometimes I can hear things, but I feel things. Feeling is my biggest sense. I
yeah,
can visually see some things. So for my daughter and I, it is a telepathic communication. I can visually see her here on my left, and um, it's, I could say with my physical eyes, sensed her in a more physical presence during some more, I would say, critical things in my life, like when I was going into surgery, or things like I've had some health issues, and through some of those trying times, I felt her presence even more and stronger. But just on a day-to-day basis, I do journey work to connect with her and communicate with her. But it's built up over time as
yeah,
well. Yeah.
yeah. And I think once you have the experience of telepathy, and telepathy is the language of the spirit world, it's how we actually spoke to each other or had a communication before languages even existed, even in this world and the spirit world. Once you can develop that telepathic communication, there's nothing like it, because it's just like picking up a
Yeah.
phone and having a conversation with it. But until you've actually experienced it, it's difficult to explain. But I think what I want people to know, and through your work as well, is that you can develop this. This isn't something like you weren't interested in mediumship. It wasn't something that was particularly, you were very spiritual, but it wasn't particularly on your radar. But you taught yourself. So what would you say to um people that have lost loved ones, and especially people that have, or parents that have lost children, that are desperate to communicate with them or have some kind of sign even, but they just don't even know where to start?
Well, there's a lot I could unpack here because I could talk about this for a long time. So I'll try to kind of summarize some of the points. But the first thing that I would want them to know is I understand it can feel like a lonely journey, because I remember when I was receiving these signs and I was starting to train as a medium and studying after death communication. I would mention it to people and I would kind of get the blank stare, like, she's lost it, or
Yeah.
that's really uncomfortable. I don't know what to say. So it can feel very lonely
Mm-hmm.
when you have this desire. And I also want to bring awareness to, there was a point in the very beginning for me, not only, with the skepticism that I had around after death communication, but I had this tremendous fear that if I did try, I literally remember sitting there saying, if I try to have this connection with my daughter on the other side and I can't, can I live with that? Rather than wondering if I could. Because if you could wonder, but never try and
Yeah.
just wonder, but if you actually tried and couldn't, could I live with that? So I know I just want to bring awareness to that. That is a big fear that
Yeah.
people have. And a lot of the clients that I work with when I do mediumship readings for them, they will even say, it took me a while to get to doing this reading with you because I'm afraid that I'm not going to have that connection. And that's almost more painful.
Yeah. And having your hopes dashed and being so disappointed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to bring that fear up, but I also want to say that I believe that you can have a connection. The type of connection and so forth can be different for people. There's different factors that come into play. Not everybody might want to have a connection with their loved one on the other side, and that's okay. If you do, your intuitive senses are such a key aspect of that. So it's developing your intuition and your intuitive senses. It's also working on your grief, because our loved ones on the other side have their energy, and they vibrate at a much higher frequency than we do here. Our physical bodies
Yeah.
really, are heavy, and our frequency is not as high. So when we're grieving and we're in what I call more of the dark feelings of grief, the lower, heavier energies of grief, that alone can create some blocks to that connection.
Yeah.
So it's really, I know how difficult it is to work with your grief and want to have this connection, because it almost seems unfair that to have this connection, you have to work on your grief,
You have to work on your grief, and ironically, that's the time that you need it the most, is when you're in deep grief.
Yeah.
But it just feels so unfair because the spirit world can't access, because the density that we're in, it's hard for them to come down.
Yeah.
So in terms of um in terms of working on their grief and then trusting their intuition, do you because I know you offer mediumship as a standalone service, and you're also a fully qualified grief coach as well, do you offer guidance as to how to connect, like coaching for how to connect with your loved ones on the other side?
I do. With my private clients, I help them with having that connection and establishing like that journey that I started with my daughter, and
Yeah.
having them practice that. And that's very powerful. And I'm working on developing a program to teach on that to a group of people rather than just one-on-one.
Okay.
But that learning how to do that journey to your loved one is a really powerful exercise to begin it.
Absolutely. You can, talking from experience here, you can speak to all the mediums in the world, but when you can actually establish a relationship with your loved one and be able to communicate, which I believe that you can, it's like a muscle, you can train to do it. There's nothing like that. So
Yeah.
that's amazing you're doing that program. I just want to touch on prolonged grief disorder, because I know that's something that you understandably suffered with, and the concept of losing a loved one and not wanting to be alive. I'm not talking about actively suicidal, but not wanting to go so you can be with your loved one. what advice, because I know you've suffered firsthand, and I know that you've been through this yourself. What advice and help could you give those that are suffering from prolonged grief disorder?
Yeah, well, to kind of touch on the, I just for a brief moment on the suicide aspect of this, you had asked me earlier about my colleague that committed suicide after her husband died. So
Yeah,
there are instances where people truly are contemplating that, and if that is someone listening, please seek help for that. There are, on the other end of the scale, there's this, and I'm just going to share my story with it. I
yeah,
had this feeling of, I just want to die to be with my daughter, but I'm not suicidal. Um, but I just couldn't help but want to die to be with her again. Like that's,
of course.
to say I'm looking forward to my death is the biggest thing I'm looking forward to, is how I felt for a long time, and just wanting to die to be with her, even though I wasn't suicidal. But I also felt like I can't tell my counselor this, or my psychologist this, because they're going to think I'm suicidal. They aren't going to understand. So I felt like I was living with that alone.
Mhm.
Um, and I do think it's natural for some people to want to be with their loved one again.
Yeah,
So that energy of feeling like I just want to die to be with my daughter again, and I'm looking forward to death to be with her again, that kept my energy low. Like I had to learn to shift that and reframe that a bit, to say I'm I'm looking forward to fulfilling my life's mission so that I can be with my daughter in a spiritual way.
yeah,
And that changed a lot with my energy and my frequency.
yeah.
Um, but prolonged grief or complicated grief is something, there's different definitions for it, but I don't think there's any certain amount of time for grief. I think it's more of the nature of your grief. If the nature of your grief is staying in more of the darkness or the lower energy for a long time, there's a calling from your soul to work on healing that, or transforming that into higher energy.
Definitely. I wanted to ask as well that, do you have communication with your mother on the other side as well, or do they both come together, or like, how does it work?
It took me about a year to have communication with my mom. And my mom was doing, when we transitioned, go through certain levels, and there's different healing that we do. And my mom was doing some healing work. But it was a year before I connected with my mom. So for anyone out there who hasn't received signs or is waiting, I just want you to know it doesn't mean it's not happening or not coming. But it took me a year to have a connection with my mom.
Yeah, and it's hard for them in the spirit world. They need to learn a whole new language,
Yeah.
and get used to it over there as well. So yeah, can take some time. Um, we've got 5 minutes left of the Zoom, so I'm really curious. Keira and your mom, have they given you any information about what it's like over there? How they're doing, what they do all day? I mean, these are questions that I yeah, I think every single day. Yeah, what are they all doing over there? What's it like?
Yeah, and actually in one of the journeys I did with my daughter, she showed me where I would be, where she is, and where I would be, as I transition. Because you can create where you go.
Yeah,
On the other side, there's a lot of opportunity to create. It's just from more of a consciousness level than physical. Like we don't, it's not physical. But my daughter is a spirit guide for other people who have transitioned from drug overdoses, and helping them with their transition. So she's a spirit guide. She also works with me when I do readings.
oh,
Um,
so she brings through other spirits for your clients.
yes,
Love that. And I
she
really think she was a translator in life.
she was an interpreter and translator in life, and she's doing that still, but just in a different way with a different language.
That's so cool.
Uh,
She's utilizing those skills over there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm a lot more in tune with what my daughter is doing. My mom, like, I try to respect that and not look too much into it, and Spirit doesn't want us to know everything. If we were meant to know every single thing about it, our experience as a human would be different as well.
That's very true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I often think that, it's like, why is it so hard? Why can't we just have a conversation with them? I know they're there. Okay, and just finally, Kim, what advice would you give to anyone who has recently lost a loved one, and especially parents that have lost children?
I know, I just want to say my heart goes out to you. I know firsthand what that is like, and words can't put in, you can't put into words anything about it that, there's nothing that anyone can say to really change that or make a difference. But what I would like to share is your loved ones in spirit really are still with you. And you can have a connection with them, whether it's on your own with them, through a medium, or both. I do both. To know that you are going to see them again. You will be with them in a much closer way when it's your time to transition. But because you're still here, your soul has a purpose here. And, it's there, the time between now and when you will transition and be with your loved one again, it really in a human life is short. And just know that your soul has a purpose here. But the love still exists between worlds. That love, part of grief is feeling like you have all this love that has nowhere to go, and they feel your love. So talk with them. They're sharing love with you, and just know this is temporary.
Yeah.
And it may feel like you don't know how you're going to live after this loss, but you can. It's not easy, but you can.
And that's your program. It's called Love Between Worlds, which is just what
It is.
you were talking about. So,
Yeah.
and just finally, Kim, what services can you offer people? How can people reach out to you if they're watching this and they'd like some extra support?
Well, I offer grief coaching, and that's more from a spiritual perspective. I know, through my own experience, the grief support that is in society in general wasn't enough for me. And I really, really relied on the spiritual healing aspect for that. So grief coaching, I do spiritual healing work. I do evidential mediumship readings. And for people who are looking for more of like, what is my soul purpose? Why am I here? And really wanting to know more about their life, I do astrology readings as well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today, Kim. It's been an absolute honor, and I'm so privileged to have the opportunity to speak to you and share your wonderful work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm honored to be able to connect with you and share. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Kim. I'll speak to you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.